Welcome to Sporting Goals, the BTEC Sport and Exercise Science webinar series, supporting educators and learners to maximise the value of their BTEC qualifications during and beyond study. This week, in episode 4, we will be meeting with AOC Sport, the Association of Colleges. We'll be considering their initiatives and shared practices, and also be looking at the impact for BTEC learners on the curriculum and beyond. Although this episode is England-centric, as that is where Association of Colleges align, I'm hoping that there's practice and ideas and thoughts that can be shared colleges, sixth forms, schools, and across the home nations. We have myself, Gareth Reynolds, the sector manager at Pearson, and I'd really like to welcome our guests today, Matt Rhodes and also Kirsty Hickson. So how are you both doing?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Gareth. Glad to be here and talking to you.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank you both. Matt, just start with you. Obviously, we're going to be talking about Association of Colleges Sport today, but just before we get into that, I'd be really interested to understand what your role is. Obviously, policy manager, as it says there on the slide, but what does that really look like? And I suppose just to extend on that, what brought you to be involved in sport, in education?
Cool, thanks. I don't think I've ever explained my role in the same way twice, to be honest, and it can depend on what week you get me in. I mean, lots of people say they enjoy their role because it's varied, but my role truly is varied. I work within the policy team, which has 3 members of staff, including Kirsty, and our roles predominantly to work with heads of sport, curriculum managers, to support the provision of sport in the study programme, so the curriculum element of sport. As part of that, we work with a lot of external partners, such as SimSpur, awarding organisations, Sport England, essentially to make sure that colleges have got a good grasp of what's going on in the sports sector, so they can make their study programmes appropriate for their students. Also ensure that employers can have some input into what they're developing. So that's one part of it. We also are the voice really for college sport, and quite a bit of our work is around ensuring that sector is represented in government consultations, in strategy development with different organisations, just to make sure that this area of the education system isn't forgotten, and there isn't just that focus on schools and HE. So, you know, a lot of our time is spent saying, you know, and colleges, don't forget colleges, to making sure that their voice is heard. So that's part of it. But talking about the variety, yesterday I was in Middlesbrough delivering a regional tournament tennis and badminton competition. So there's real variety to what we do. I've worked in sport since graduating with a sport degree. I've never thought about doing anything different. I love sport. I love the benefits of sport. I enjoy trying to get new people involved in sport and physical activity, which is an additional part of my role, is leading on our work with Sport England, which I think we'll touch on later. But that's really around challenging some of the inequalities that exist in sport and trying to make sure that everybody has an appropriate opportunity to benefit from being involved in sport and physical activity.
Great, that's really useful and insightful for the listeners, and I think, you know, that variety's come through in some of those examples, but also your passion and showing that the right people are in place doing the right thing. So thank you for that. Kirsty, what about yourself?
Well, Matt's given a really good overview of what we do as a team. So a bit more specifically around my role. So the curriculum policy support I do for colleges in the South. I'm also the policy lead for mental health within AOC Sport, and then also work on various projects, including our Leadership Academy, which is probably our biggest project in AOC Sport at the moment, which I'm going to talk a bit more about later. So that's a bit more specific about my role. In terms of how I came into working in sport, growing up, I'm not a naturally sporty person. I'm probably the least naturally sporty person within AOC Sport. Whenever we've done sporting activities, I'm definitely not the best at them as a team. But I just loved sport at school. I found a couple of sports that I was okay at, and then just really loved everything about it and the benefits that it gave me at school. So there was nothing else I could imagine sort of studying at university. Like Matt, I got a degree in sport. And then that's what I was determined to try and work in when I graduated as well. And yeah, across the way, did a few different lots of different part-time roles with different organisations, sort of doing some swimming teaching, some coaching, working for charities, local authority. And then eventually I ended up working part-time as well as that as a teaching assistant in a college, in a further education college. And then that's how I ended up getting a role in sports development in the college, because the role came up while I was there as a teaching assistant. I don't know if I would have even thought to work in a college in sport. I didn't really know that was a thing until I started working in one as a teaching assistant, and then this full-time role came up, and then AOC Sport, a job came up, and then that's how I'm here now.
That's great. Thank you for that. I think what that does as well, it shows in terms of the breadth of your experiences, obviously really informs what you're doing, and that FE experience is great for the role that you're in. But I think the point you make around maybe not being the champion when you have your sports events, it is an important one, because sport is much more than that, and the fact that you enjoy it and the value of it, I think that's really going to come through when we go on to the first slide, I suppose, of what you've shared with me before we got into the vision of AOC. We've got a slide, almost like a poster here, that says fit for college, fit for work, fit for life. And that really, for me, starts to bring to life that actually we are saying sport, but you've both touched on it. There's so much more. What does this mean to you, Matt? What it says on this? What is it trying to get across? Well, I can see what it's getting across, but to those listening,
I guess it's really that recognising that being active is important for more than just your physical health or the enjoyment you might get out of being involved in team sport or individual sport. So it's recognising that it can impact really broad across your life. And, fit for college is around, it can impact on your attainment and your attendance and how you feel about work and how you're motivated about getting on with your studies. Fit for work, I guess, is recognising that, particularly in some industries, being physically fit is really important. And there's some examples where colleges have done programs with groups of students based around their ambitions and the sector they want to work in. And I guess more importantly, or not necessarily more importantly, but really prevalent at the moment, is around mental health and how physical activity can impact on your mental health and have a positive impact to make sure you're in a good position for work. And then fit for life, I guess, is just about ensuring that you've got good physical health to help you live a successful and happy life. And it's just recognizing that it's broad, it has way broader impacts than just about keeping you fit.
Definitely, and I know there's some points that are going to be touched on later, as Kirsty made reference to, around mental well-being, leadership, those transferable things from sport. So this is much more for those listening. This isn't just about the value of vocational quals or what you're, for example, obviously I'm speaking here from a BTEC perspective, what our BTEC learners can do in your centres to facilitate sport and physical activity for other learners. This is about actually the legacy and lifestyle and something that can impact a learner that's doing something that's so far removed from performance sport. And I know we're going to go into that, and that probably links really nicely into your vision. And I don't know if you'd like to speak to that, Matt.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I should caveat this with is that we're currently in the process of developing a new strategy, which will follow this one. But really, our vision is not going to change significantly. We still really recognise and value the impact that sport and physical activity can have on any young person, whether they think they like sport, want to compete at the highest level, or it might be their first venture into some sort of physical activity. And really, it's a very ambitious strategy and vision, in that we really want every student within college to be able to be physically active and enjoy those benefits, regardless of what level or experience that might be. And really, this strategy was a strategy for the sector, recognising that AOC Sport alone couldn't ensure that happens. colleges alone couldn't ensure that happens, but really trying to drive a collaborative approach for colleges, ourselves, other external partners, to try and create an ecosystem where every college has that opportunity to be active.
Great. And Kirsty, can I ask you, in terms of, my experience historically of working in colleges, if I'd mentioned to a member of staff AOC Sport, I think the first thing that would have resonated is sort of competition sport. Has there been a shift where there's more of an awareness, or has there always been an awareness across the body of members and centres and those in centres that actually this isn't just about performance?
Yeah, I think there definitely has been a shift that's definitely growing more and more, our reach across the college, because I think predominantly our contacts have been in sport, so reaching that bit further out, and they're the people that obviously completely agree with what we do and believe it, but I think it's important to reach further across the colleges to get that point across. And that has been happening. So, for example, this year with the Leadership Academy, like I mentioned earlier, that project, we've had colleges being signed up by vice principals, and then them telling their colleges that they're going to be involved in, particularly a college group that springs to mind. I won't say the name, but they've got multiple campuses, and they've said they've allocated a lead within each college, within each campus, sorry, to lead on that within the college, so they see the real value of it and having that whole buy-in across the college group. So yeah, it's definitely something that's been growing.
Brilliant, and thank you for that. And Matt, just in regards to that strategy, as you say, that's sort of continuing to evolve as everything does. But those three prongs, as they stand around the educational outcomes, the employability, and the health, which again speak to that previous slide with how sport and physical activity impact. So I know there's been some research that's been taking place, and maybe you could share that with the listeners.
Yeah, sure. So this is pre-COVID research we did. So we did a survey with about just short of 8,000 students across our colleges, and this really speaks to the previous slide that we are getting more evidence around the impact of sport and physical activity on a wider range of metrics. So it's not just about you being fit. There's lots of measures here about how being more active increases your levels of happiness, life satisfaction, anxiety is decreased. And then there's other things about social inclusion, but also the impacts on attainment and employability. Active students feel more confident about getting a job or moving on to a successful destination when they finish college. Similarly, around expected grades, active students have higher expected grades when it's tallied up as UCAS points. So we're really seeing the wider impact of that. And I think it talks to your previous question about AOC Sport and its evolution of being more than just a competition provider. And I think that's partly down to the evidence we're starting to be able to develop and show to colleges and other organisations about the impact on all students and not just the sporty students, but also a recognition that the demographics within a college contain above national average percentages of people from groups who traditionally are less active. So there's also some real scope to make an impact within the college population in terms of growing the number of active young people. So, there's a target audience there for colleges and for partners to engage with to make some real significant impact.
Yeah, and I think that's really useful, and that sort of obviously supports the use of initiatives and sport and physical activity and the value that it can bring to a college community. We know that we have sports students and we hope that they engage with it, but that's also not a given. Some of the sports students may be on sports programs but not engaging with physical activity, or actually their sole focus may be around performance, and they might be missing some of those well-being elements as well. But also, as you said, there's harder to reach students where maybe physical activities not being accessible, maybe it's not something they've been able to access or understand because they've not had that experience of it previously in a way that's positive. So is there a sense of the reach across different learners?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kirsty spoke to it around a lot of it is around our contacts within the colleges, and it's something that we're working really hard to expand on, to try and get students from different curriculum areas involved in sport. But you're also right, Gareth, in that I think it's probably a misconception that sport students are all sporty and active.
Yeah.
It's certainly something I found when I worked in colleges, that I expected them to be the active ones, but wasn't always necessarily true. We were encouraged at some points from external partners to try and focus elsewhere, but actually there was still some big scope to impact on sports students to get them more active. But our reach is definitely expanding. We're working more with student services, enrichment coordinators, SEND departments, mental health practitioners within colleges, to really try and engage the people who've probably got the most to benefit from getting involved in sport and physical activity.
Yeah, and those enrichment initiatives in colleges is real opportunity for what you're doing to be able to access and penetrate or reframe sport, physical activity to learners, and we'll touch on that as we move forward. So I know you've got some data research from your active lives.
Yeah, so this is Sport England's measure essentially of levels of activity. So this is what they measure on a national basis, but some of the data can be broken down to education stage. So this active lives data that was published, I think, in October, really shows the impact of COVID and some of the associated restrictions. And this data covers May 2020 to May 2021, and essentially it showed that young people between 16 and 24 were really hugely affected by the lockdown and the restrictions. Just short of 450,000 fewer 16 to 24-year-olds were classed as active in comparison to the previous period. And it also showed that the inequalities around ethnicity, socioeconomics and disability really grew, so that the disparities are growing. And looking at the overall picture, it's pretty concerning, but there was a bit of light for the FE sector, who in comparison to schools and universities actually limited the downturn in activity. So the percentage of FE students classed as active decreased by 1.8%, which obviously is not great. We don't want to see any decreases, but in comparison to schools and HE, that was actually really positive. And there was also a small decrease in the number of FE students classed as inactive. So that's less than 30 minutes of activity a week. And I think it's got to be congratulations really to colleges. Colleges and partners showed some real tenacity and commitment in ensuring there were opportunities for FE students to engage during the various lockdowns. And we ran a number of challenges and programs and virtual competitions to get students involved. And moving forward off the back of this, we're really trying to make sure that colleges, policymakers, partners recognise that sport and physical activity is really crucial now as part of the education recovery for students as we're emerging from the pandemic. We're going to continue to try and provide programs and opportunities for those students to engage and really have a focus on those who face the greatest barriers to participation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to pause and just acknowledge and champion the fantastic work that has been done, in the sector at FE around this. And although, as you say, it's a decrease, it's very relative, isn't it? There's really something there to sort of cling on to and springboard off of them. And I know we're going to talk about some of those initiatives and good practice that was undertaken in centres over and still continuing to whilst we're in the stage that we're in. And it would be good for other colleagues to be able to listen to and share some of that. But I think what this also does for me from an organisation perspective is actually there's a real need, and you mentioned SIMSPA earlier, these qualifications that are mapped to SIMSPA for learners to be out in their communities, helping with this growing, building up what is going to be a significant problem for the health of the nation. not just around physical, how it always used to be framed, but our everyday well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's so important. And, you know, we're seeing lots of challenges, which Kirsty might talk to more around the impact on students' mental health of the last 18 months to 2 years. And we really see sport and physical activity as an important tool, as part of a wider approach to try and support some of those students who've been really impacted by what's gone on over this period. And, you know, we're trying to support those students with different programs, which we'll come on to later. But the community reach as well is really important. Community sports suffered. And I know volunteers for community clubs are becoming harder and harder to get. And that should provide some great opportunities for students studying sport qualifications to try and get some really valuable and worthwhile experience.
Definitely, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think what this we've moved on to now is just sharing some of the practice and some of the examples that was undertaken during that 2020 to 2021 period.
Yeah, so I mean, it was great to see that colleges, despite everything that was going on, really pushed to engage with these programs and try and make sure there was some opportunities for their students. So bearing in mind this was during a year where students were in and out of colleges, some of the statistics here are really impressive. So through our Inclusion Hub program, which is a support program to try and engage students with disabilities, nearly 1,000 students were engaged during this period. And also colleges recruited ambassadors to support that activity. So we have a range of ambassador programs, which Kirsty will go into in a bit more detail later, but they're essentially to try and add some capacity to colleges to enable them to drive some focused activity for different groups. The virtual challenges were hugely successful. So students from over 100 colleges have walked, run or cycled over 500,000 miles during the lockdown through the virtual challenges, which was brilliant to see. And we've got lots of students who traditionally may not have engaged with physical activity have got involved in that. We also had 100 colleges sign up to the Leadership Academy. One other thing that we've moved into, which was really helpful actually during lockdown in keeping colleges engaged, was our partnership with British eSports, which allowed students across the country to connect with teammates and compete through FIFA and basketball competitions. And they were able to do that during lockdown from home. And then we managed to squeeze in, our competition team must have changed the fixtures 4 or 5 times during the year, only to then be halted by a new lockdown or restrictions. But we managed to get in nearly 700 fixtures between early May and mid-June to try and make sure that there was some way for colleges to be competitive and get their teams out. So that was great. And we had over 100 colleges engaged in sort of 6 weeks of competitions in various leagues and festivals and cups and friendlies. But down to the hard work and tenacity of the colleges really in trying to make sure that happened, but also keeping the students engaged up until that period to make sure that they still had teams there who wanted to play.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot around that, isn't there? Because we know students come in, particularly if we're talking about the performance side here, that's very much their identity and what they're working towards, and actually a big hook of them being involved in that FE environment within their study program is being in that team. And with those fixtures not taking place, would have been a real challenge for the learners, their support mechanisms, their own mental health and well-being, and the colleges trying to keep them engaged. But speaking to colleges, things such as the cycling, one of my former colleges, I know that sort of took off, no pun intended, but took off around the whole college, and that really created a sense of community, which was needed. That something had to pull them together. That was fantastic. And speaking to some academy learners around, I think it was the Archon Combine, you know, so they could really test themselves and challenge themselves. All of these things around community and that social piece, I think really help pull students and centres through, or at least have something to hang on to. And then that piece that you did at the end at the AOC, insurance and fixtures, although that's not how anyone would have wanted it to look, I think it's fantastic that learners had that opportunity to be able to put their skills and their aspirations into play.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was, despite all the challenges, you know, it's actually been a really successful period in terms of us and colleges being able to pivot to make sure that students had something to do to keep them engaged, but also, I mean, the impact on the mental health, as we touched on earlier, being able to stay involved, communicate with the other students and their peers, and be part of a team still has really helped some learners and some colleges.
Okay, what I'll do is I'll move on, because I know we are going to speak about things such as this girl can, etc., in a couple of slides.
Yeah, so AOC Sport Introducing is something we've launched this academic year, and essentially it's us working with partners to look at new ways of getting students active. So some non-traditional sports, or not even non-traditional, but sports students may have previously not thought was accessible to them, or was not something they had opportunity to do. So really we're developing a range of offers with partners, supporting them to make sure that it's appropriate for FE students. Some offers previously that have been pushed towards colleges have been a bit school focused, and we're trying to ensure that these programs are really appropriate for FE learners. So some of the stuff we're doing at the minute that we're really excited about is with an organisation called Planet Earth Games, which is looking at a growing issue within sport and across all areas of education and society, really, which is around sustainability. So we're looking at the relationship between physical activity and climate change, and how we can develop some activities. So we've got a range of activities that we're going to launch in January, which will see colleges engage in some sustainable activity. But other things are, you know, we've got more virtual competition going on. We've got some sort of introduction guides to different sports. So this is just a way for us to try and get new sports or activities into colleges that previously may have been difficult to access.
Yeah, and I think what that also does is it creates a diversity of sports, and therefore makes it more accessible for a whole range of learners that maybe they weren't accommodated in the traditional formats, and depending on where they're located in terms of green spaces or facilities. I think, you know, this really opens that up, it encourages that and promotes that, and where we know there's an initiative or it's measured, we know that it gets some traction. So I think that's really important. But to that point around sustainability, all the sector community globally, we know how important this is. So I think it's fantastic that AOC are essentially leading from the front and putting this out there, because why shouldn't sport be involved and push and drive this as well? Because they should, you know, this is the responsibility of all of us. So it's fantastic that this is now sort of embedded and integrated in your introduction of some of your new sports.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, carbon literacy is really important for colleges, and we're looking at developing some support for staff around how can we support them to build carbon literacy into what they are delivering as part of study programs or tutorials, but being able to link it to sport and physical activity, because we know that sport and physical activity can have a huge impact on their environment, and it's broader than just, you know, having reusable water bottles. There are other things around workforce and active travel that we can really start to make an impact through sport.
Yeah, great. It puts it on the agenda, and therefore people work to that. And no, that's really, really pleasing and encouraging to see. So Kirsty, I know that this is your slide. We're not going to go into every area in granular detail because there's so much there, and I know that colleagues in centres will be able to pick certain bits up on here, but there are bits that would be really valuable if you could sort of give us some more detail and highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, and we've kind of referenced at different points so far in the discussion around our AOC Sport Leadership Academy, which is a project we've been running for about 3 years now, and has evolved and grown in various ways. So one of the main things that I'm going to talk about in that programme is our ambassadors. So the Leadership Academy is something that any AOC Sport member college can be a part of, and it's there to enhance and support with their leadership programme. And we've tried to make it as accessible as possible, because we really appreciate that colleges are at very different places in their leadership and volunteering journeys. So we wanted it to be something that anyone can get involved in. It might be something that helps begin a leadership programme at a college, or it might be something that just enhances a really well-established programme and offers something a bit different. And so the ambassadors, which is what I'll mainly focus on, so we've got 3 ambassador programs that we've had for the last 2 years. So our This Girl Can ambassador program was our first one, which I think is about I'm trying to remember how long ago now it is, about 4 or 5 years old. And that's around the Sport England This Girl Can campaign and the research that came out around why females were less likely to be active. And Sport England have done loads of great work around that campaign, around trying to normalise sport and physical activity. The research that they did showed that the biggest barrier for sport and physical activity was fear of judgment for women. And the campaign is really about trying to break down those barriers and make people realise make women realise it's completely normal to sweat. It's completely normal to, to be all these different things when you're being active. And being active is, as we've mentioned already, what you want it to be. It doesn't have to be playing traditional team sport. It can be any way you enjoy moving your body. And so the This Girl Can ambassador's role is around trying to utilise that campaign around the college and influence their peers and get more females active and think about what they can do at their specific college. The Inclusion Ambassadors is in its 3rd year now, and that's around getting more students with disabilities active. So the ambassadors themselves don't have to have disabilities, but we have found that it's attracted more disabled students into that programme, and their role is to really check and challenge their college around whether their offer is inclusive to students with disabilities. And then we lastly have our mental health ambassadors, which was only in its 2nd year. So we introduced it for the first time last year as a result of a partnership with Mind, the mental health charity, and it's actually been really popular. I mean, the slide that you showed previously showed that we had 140 mental health ambassadors in its first year, which I think is just really reflective of the needs of colleges at the moment and the challenges that they're facing, that they see that the mental health ambassador role is really important to them. So the mental health ambassadors, their role is to try and promote sport and physical activity as how the benefits of it on mental health at their college, and trying to promote opportunities for students with mental health problems to try and make sure that the college offer is more inclusive to those. So the ambassador roles really focus on some of those demographics that Matt mentioned earlier when he was talking about the active lives, some of those students that people that are less likely to be active. So this programme kind of offers a dual role to the dual opportunity to the college, in that there's a volunteering programme for ambassadors within the college, so something to offer to some of your students that want to be ambassadors, but the outcome is that they will hopefully get more students that are less likely to be active doing sport and physical activity in the college. And the ambassador's role is really not necessarily about organising. They can organise if they want to organise sport and physical activity, but it's really about the messaging and the promotion of those messages and those campaigns back in their college. And I think even we saw through COVID last year how the students adapted and how they delivered those programmes, and we saw really great we measured the outcomes for the students, so what skills they improve, and we still had really positive feedback about, particularly around their communication and teamwork skills, that they felt that they'd improved by being a part of this programme. And they really had to think outside the box about the way they delivered things. Social media was a big one that they were really involved in, and we had a mental health ambassador that actually got herself a job at her college working in running the social media because of the great work she'd done as a mental health ambassador. She'd done lots of Facebook Lives and other various bits and bobs, and they've actually offered her a job that she's doing part-time around her final year of study at the college. So we've seen some really positive outcomes of those and some great things that they've done. And like I said, they're really tasked to think about what they can do at their college, because every college is so different. We as an organisation can only do so much, but each college is completely different, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of facilities and their demographics. So it's really about thinking about what's going on in their college and local area and how they can adapt that. And then it's quite really good transferable skills for those students as well. So hopefully they're making their offer more inclusive at the college, but those ambassadors, we believe, are really adding to their value of their college education and their employability skills and things that they can put on job applications, university applications moving forwards. Yeah, that's kind of the main one about those ambassadors. And like I said, we've got really positive feedback and it's growing year on year, got more and more ambassadors involved. This year we are doing some, hopefully, if COVID allows, slightly nervous, but in January we'll be doing some development days where we bring ambassadors from across the country together at 4 regional events and do some work around softer skills, so around teamwork and collaboration, and really try and add more value to their experience at college and get them to think about what they're doing in their ambassador roles when they go back to college as well.
Yeah, I think, obviously all of that work is fantastic, and each of those separate boxes really are important and bring value to any given community, let alone a college. I think anecdotally, back to centre, speaking to a sport and exercise science group, actually this girl someone wanted to be an ambassador. They then used the BTEC sports learners and they went across to the different campuses of the college, to different areas that maybe weren't engaging with sport, asked them what they wanted to do, made it very clear that they didn't want any male staff or males involved. So it was female sports learners, female staff, and they tailored 2 days worth of activity for those females, for them to feel comfortable and engage in activities that they wanted to do that was good for their mental well-being, some really focusing on physical activity or just trying something new. But that for me was really rewarding to see those young women set that up, drive that forward, make that happen. And then the year after, they started to encourage local primary schools in on the same day, trying to be aspirational in terms of sport and physical activity. And that's just one siloed anecdotal example. And there's things that's happening across all of these. But the fact you're bringing them together to share that practice, I think is great. That's recognition as well. But again, that point around, yes, of course, it's nice on their CV, but actually the skills they're learning and they're gaining through this. And I'm thinking about BTEC learners, really crafting their skills, being in real world situations, in really valuable and important situations as well, and learning those people dynamics and those people skills, which is so important regardless of what job they do moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so transferable to so many different things. And particularly if it's BTEC sport learners, these are essentially real world sports development things that are going on in the moment. Like we said, these are people that are less likely to be active. So they're getting really valuable experience if that's the kind of career that they would like to go into. So, but again, those skills are completely transferable into all kinds of, different sectors and roles.
Great. Now that's been really useful. And as I said, I'm sure if colleagues want to delve into this further, this would be on your website for them to go further and find out more.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, Matt, we've got this regional skills report, and I know you wanted to speak to that.
Yes. And so this was in recognition of a couple of things, really. Firstly, around the intent of curriculum provision, which is something that Ofsted are looking at it in quite a bit of detail at the minute in their inspections, but also about, we recognise that getting skills development right is one of the key challenges for college staff, and that the best prepared students will be the most successful and able to show prospective employers that they can fill those skills gaps and give themselves an edge in the jobs market. So we worked with MZ, who provide labour market intelligence, and use their jobs posting analysis tool. And by identifying, categorising job adverts and then breaking them down into skills, we were able to identify the top 10 common and hard skills that appear on job adverts in the sports sector, within the main occupations, within sport and physical activity. So broadly speaking, hard skills relate to technical requirements of a role, and common skills relate to transferable skills and knowledge and behaviour needs. But we were able to work through a series of different roles, and identify those skills so it could support curriculum managers, in terms of their planning in how they deliver their qualifications to make sure that they really draw out the skills that employers are looking for. And we develop these skills reports for each of the 9 regions within England, and they're available to all college staff, and we're looking at how we can review and update these based on the most recent and up-to-date data and job postings. But essentially they're a really useful curriculum planning tool for staff within colleges to use.
Yeah, what I really like about this, with my sort of thinking about assessment and qualifications hat on, is that actually, as you say, you can tailor that to your local contextualization. Thinking about BTECs, it's within centres' gift to really amend that assessment methodology as long as they can show the competence. So actually, these common skills within a given area, or there may be some infrastructure or organisation area that's asking for something specific, there's no reason why they can't set up that assignment or assessment using that context or a different assessment methodology to make sure that that comes through really strongly. So yes, I think from a curriculum manager's perspective of saying these might be the units we want to use, because yeah, we want a bit of sports tech in there, or we want to make sure we have the safeguarding endorsed unit, whatever it may be. But then in terms of people delivering that, looking at their assessment plan and saying, okay, how can we get a bit of innovation into this assessment methodology? Or how can I make them teach this as opposed to just present it? So I think this is really powerful. And also in the same breath, I realised that this would take colleagues time to sit down and really look at this and bounce the ideas. But in terms of the value end to end, as you mentioned, Ofsted, curriculum planning, the value for the learners, this is a really nice tool to be shared. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
I just wanted to flag up some of the BTEC quals that we have in these areas, and I think that speaks to, as I just mentioned, that last slide. And I know you mentioned Simpsborough earlier, so I'm sure colleagues are already aware, because on the first episode we met with Simpsborough, and I don't know if this is something that's coming through when you're speaking to centres, Matt and Kirsty, around actually the value of things being mapped and the value of Simpsborough and what that means for the sporting community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've worked alongside Simpsborough for quite a long time now, and they've supported lots of our networks and have been speaking to heads of sport, curriculum managers around the standards and the value of them. And I think it's absolutely sort of permeating through colleges now around the importance of qualifications being mapped against national standards. I think it's really recognised and valued now. Yeah,
and that's also that importance of that curriculum planning. Yes, we want them to have those hard skills, but are they mapped? Are they endorsed? And I think that's essentially the purpose of me sharing this slide here, because those ones with those yellow sort of dots next to them, colleagues will be able to see that on the website on the overview. These are all mapped to standards, and they speak to some of the things on that previous slide around instructing circuits, etc., etc. So there may be something there when people are in that curriculum planning phase to just be in those informed positions, but I think that really sort of helps their next steps with their planning. I think there's something I would like to say around sort of the value of the qualifications in the sports area. I think all the stuff that we've seen in these previous slides really ring true with the value of sports qualifications and how they are going to support the community and the country, I suppose, moving forward in terms of health, exercise. And there's a whole piece around the reframing, which we've been going through around well-being as well. And that comes through, and also accessing and giving equality to all communities. Just interested in your thoughts in terms of maybe transferable skills. I know they've been mentioned, and the value of vocational qualifications.
Yeah, I mean, hugely valuable. And the mention of transferable skills makes you think to a conversation I had last week, actually, with a former colleague who worked for us, and his role was around organising competition, events, leagues and cups, quite a lot of logistical work and planning. And he's studied sport at FE and at HE, and he's recently moved to a project management role.
Right.
And I said, how does your previous experience and the stuff you've learned through sport, how's that supported you? and he says it's helped him no end, because essentially, you know, he's managing projects now, but it's the same. Managing a competition is an event is managing a project. You know, chasing suppliers, booking venues, getting all the systems in place, and the evaluation and afterwards. That it's the same. He's doing the same things that he was doing in sport, but now just applying it to another industry. And I mean, I can speak to the degree that I did. The majority of students actually are now all over, working all over. Their first jobs may have been in sport, but a lot have developed, you know, and used the skills that they've taken from their studies and are applying them to lots of different sectors. So without doubt, you know, vocational qualifications are hugely important. You know, we want good people to stay in the sports sector, obviously, and especially in recognition of the need. And you mentioned the broader approach and the recognition of sport in well-being, in public health, and I think that's starting to come through. And the Sport England strategy talks to that, around how sport is going to have a broader impact and is going to work with more non-traditional partners. And, you know, we really want to keep good people in the sector.
Definitely, and that's a really nice example. And I think sort of rewinding that example, that colleague probably wouldn't have gone into project management qualification at 16 because, you know, we don't know where we want to go. But learning those skills and being engaged in education is something that you enjoy as a catalyst. I think is really powerful, and yeah, that is a really nice example to share. I really appreciate both of your time today. It's been really interesting to hear about the work that's been done by centres that's been facilitated by the AOC, and it also looks that there's lots of really interesting stuff to keep coming in the future. I appreciate that COVID will continue to play a role, but the way that, as you mentioned earlier, Matt, the pivot has happened, I think that's been really fantastic and champions the sector of FE and sport in FE as well, and the work that you're doing. I didn't know if there was anything either of you would like to add before we finish today.
I guess it's just thank you, Gareth, for giving us this opportunity. And also, if there are colleges who want to get in contact with us, please do through our website. You know, we've touched on some of the opportunities today, but you know, that they're essentially a bit of a highlights reel, and there's other areas of support and projects for colleges to get involved in. So we welcome any discussions with that or thoughts around our new strategy, and we're really wanting to hear from colleges around shaping that and making sure that it's appropriate for them and that we're heading in the right direction.
Fantastic. And Kirsty?
Yeah, no, I think Matt summarised it really well. Just, yeah, if there is anything that you want to know, please do get in touch. We're keen. Yeah, we aren't anything without colleges. So without them telling us, telling us how they want us to work, then that's really important. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you.